Why is the US Department of Justice targeting Google for breakup?
And whose cheap streaming player should you buy?
Vertical Hold is proudly brought to you by Aussie Broadband, changing the game with their award-winning network and Australian-based support.
Hi there. Welcome to Vertical Hold Behind the Tech News, the weekly podcast where we sneak across state borders to catch up with Australia's leading technology journalists and get the stories behind the tech news of the week. I'm Alex Kidman, and I'm still even now only just coming down from that epic Vertical Hold episode 300 after party. All I really remember is the green room being invaded by, I think they were ostriches. Hey, Adam Turner, did that really happen, or do I actually need yet more hangover recovery time?
Oh man, to be honest, I was more concerned about the tiger in the bathroom, but Mike was very understanding when we returned it the next day.
Look, you've got to have something to keep order in the bathrooms, and it kept the queues moving. You can't
Sure it
deny
did.
that. We're also joined this week once again by Finder Editor in Chief Angus Kidman. Gus, I dimly recall at the after party you belting out your classic karaoke rendition of Fame and somehow seamlessly shifting into Sabotage. Am I remembering that correctly?
You're half right. I started with Fame, I finished with Stutter Rap.
Oh no.
Easy mistake to make.
It's coming back to me now, out of the fog. I think I deliberately locked that one in the vault.
Yeah. We switched the cameras off when that was happening for good reason. And look, speaking of weird and out there entertainment, with the summer season fast approaching, a lot of us are going to be spending the holiday season at home in front of the TV because, well, 2020. And as if by clockwork, both Google and Amazon have recently launched new, very low cost streaming dongles. And we're going to be talking Chromecast with Google TV and Fire Stick Lite in a little bit, but sticking just to Google for now, the search giant is also under attack in the US, where the Department of Justice is alleging that it's violated antitrust and monopoly legislation and needs to be broken up. Gus, what's the basis of the Department of Justice's complaint?
Well, it's a long and complex complaint, as DOJ documents always are, but the essence of it is that Google is taking unfair advantage of what's already a really strong monopoly position. It is the big brand in
Allegedly.
search. Allegedly. Well,
If the lawyers are listening.
I think the fact that it's a big brand in search probably doesn't need an allegedly in front of it. But the allegation is that in order to maintain that position, it is coming up with unfair and exclusionary contracts with other partners to try and perpetuate that. And the big example, the most substantiated one in the complaint, and the one everyone's talking about, is the deal that it has with Apple. So it has an arrangement with Apple so that Google is the default search option on Apple devices. You can switch it, but we know people don't switch mercy. And the idea is that it has these unfair exclusionary contracts, not only that say, hey, we will give you money in order to make us there, but also restricting what else can be done about that. So that you can't, for instance, on some phones, the contract is you have to have it set as the default, and you can't allow the uninstallation of some of the Google apps. So this is really where the issue is. It's not that Google has been successful. That's not what the problem is. The problem is that it's trying to stop anyone else competing by setting these kind of unfair contract terms. So these are the basis of the allegations, and this is what we're going to see being argued about over the next few years, because these things take a very, very, very long time to actually come to court. They don't get announced and then show up in court the next day. So this is a topic that I feel we're going to be returning to on Vertical Hold quite frequently over the next year at least, and possibly much longer.
But no one is forcing people to use Google. No one is even forcing people to keep Google as the default. I mean, this all obviously harks back to the stuff we saw with Microsoft back in the 90s, I want to say. But I'm pretty sure back then the argument was that Microsoft may lock certain things in and said, you can't change the default. You can't get rid of this. That's not what Google's doing here, is it?
Well, a lot of the detail hasn't emerged on exactly what the contracts are like, because even though the complaint exists, more evidence is going to come forth. The essence of it is not around whether or not you could switch it off in some cases, but the extent to which it could be removed, or that competitors could be allowed in. To go back to the parallel with the Microsoft case all those years ago, that actually started out because Microsoft had this slightly nasty clause which said that if you wanted to be able to buy a copy of Windows to install on some of the PCs you sold, you had to buy a copy of Windows for every PC you sold, even if the PC actually was going to have something else on it. And that was deemed anti-competitive because effectively no one was going to pay for a copy of Windows and then pay for a separate operating system to put it on there. And the parallels here are going to be around the notion that you might say, right, well, it's not possible for, the uninstallation example is one thing where you say, like, our apps must remain there and you can't remove them. That's going to be the essence of the argument. But this is very much the argument that Google has brought up in its response. It said, look, no one's forcing you to do these things. You do have the option to make changes. And again, that was ultimately what happened in the Microsoft case, which ended up becoming about Internet Explorer and whether or not it had to be installed and whether or not you had to make it clear that you could install other stuff. But the thing is, in the Microsoft case, ultimately the DOJ did win, but it won something like 7 years after the issue had started, by which time the argument had actually moved somewhere else. So this is the big risk that you face with any kind of antitrust thing, that by the time you've actually resolved the issue at hand, even if you've come up with some kind of solution, this is tech, and tech moves a lot faster than the law does. So it's hard to say exactly how that'll play out, but there's always that fear that you're gonna be arguing something that is legally sound enough potentially, but that doesn't actually make any real difference, doesn't actually provide a remedy to the problem that you've identified.
So you're telling me that we still wait for them to settle that fight between Yahoo and Alta Vista?
Well, that might make it easier in some respects, for sure.
Gus, I mean, obviously, we're not a political podcast, but...
we could be, though. Strap in.
Well, we could be, but we're not. But the point I was going to make is, in the US, obviously, they're in the middle of election frenzy, and it's, shall we say, interesting. If there is a change at the White House, do you see this one just running through anyway or getting ditched? Do you think there's any particular kind of Trumpian angle to this?
I don't think particularly. Like, it does, the timing certainly seems convenient, but the basis of this complaint is very much about the specifics of what are these contracts that Google forms with other businesses like, and are they unfair and exclusionary? Do they make it too hard for another search engine or another search tool, more broadly, to get fair play in that space? So I would expect that, whatever happened in the US election, that this case would continue. And in fact, if you saw a change, I think it would be more likely to continue, because I think that one of the things, obviously, that the Democrats would want to do is to say, hey, we're going to be hands off and not push the Department of Justice to do stuff. If we'd seen a Trumpian push to do something to the Department of Justice, it wouldn't have been around this, because the perennial complaint that Trump has had about Google is that it's biased against letting people see information from right-wing sources, which is completely not what this particular case is about. So while the timing does look kind of interesting, I think fundamentally this obviously was something that had been worked on for a long time. It's been announced now, and we could have had another 2 changes of president by the time anything actually happens.
But also, if this was a Trump-backed thing, he'd be going on about it on Twitter like the way he did about the issues with Huawei and stuff like that. It's not his style to do it this way.
No,
he's a bit busy right now, though.
He's a bit busy.
He's never too busy to talk smack on Twitter.
Yeah.
Actually, good point. But we are becoming a political podcast, which is not what we're about. One of the things, Gus, that the DOJ has said is they're not ruling anything out, including breaking up Google. But how do you, within the context of what they're complaining about, how do you do that? Because Google owns a lot of little products and side things, and even big products like YouTube. What does that maybe look like?
That's very hard to say. And that is the classic fix for a lot of antitrust things, is to say, well, if you've got too much power, we will look at making you divest, making you split up. And it is hard, even allowing that Google is part of a bigger organization called Alphabet, and so those other things are nominally separate companies anyway. It is a hard one to solve for. It might, so I really don't know that it's necessarily going to be a case of divestment. There are other paths you could go down. There have been a lot of similar antitrust allegations in the European Union, and they just generally go for a massive fine. That's normally their outcome. I think there's something like 4 billion euros or something in fines that Google is actively contesting, I should add, in the European Union. So that's one way of going about it. It might be around saying, well, there are certain types of behavior you can't do. So it might be as simple as saying, you're not allowed to go in for these big financial contracts that say we're going to guarantee exclusive positioning for this kind of outcome. That would take a while because it's a quite specific remedy, but it could go that way. And that would be interesting for Google. Also be interesting for Apple, who, according to the allegation, makes something in the vicinity of up to $12 billion a year from this deal. So that would be an interesting outcome in itself. But yeah, I don't think it's at all clear how you would do a division that was going to solve the issue at hand, because it's not about some of Google's powers having to go somewhere else. It's about how Google chooses to exercise the power it's got in one fairly particular market.
So what about closer to home? Because we've got the whole ACCC digital platforms thing. Is that kind of like the small cousin of this DOJ complaint?
Yeah, there's certainly a relationship, and certainly one of the issues that the ACCC has been looking at is the whole notion of, as a dominant player, does this mean that Google can set unfair terms in terms of how search advertising rates work? And there's an overlap between those two. So certainly that lines up. We've known that when there have been previous big US cases like this, the ACCC often takes a kind of watching brief. It keeps an eye on it, but it effectively takes the view, hey, these guys have got a lot more money and more resources and more access to those US executives. We'll let them solve it. The other thing that's interesting is that just on the same day this happened, Rod Sims, the head of the ACCC, came out saying that he thought new laws were needed to deal with digital monopolies, that the existing structure wasn't good enough. That's actually not what's happening in the US, because while there's been some of that argument there too, this antitrust legislation goes back more than 100 years. It's from the 1890s. So the view there seems to be, actually, we don't necessarily need new regulation. Maybe we could do it with what we've going on. So that represents, I think, a bit of a divergence between the Australian and the US versions.
I'm going to say that search engine monopolies back in the 1890s were not a huge concern of the US government.
Possibly not. I mean, back in the 1890s was when IBM was being founded in order to count the US census. So there may have been some issues relating to that. But now I'm just really showing my age. I was not around to write up that particular story, I might add.
You say that. So, taking a look at a different part of Google, which I guess might be hived off in the future if the DOJ has its way, they've got new streaming hardware, which we sort of loosely talked about a couple of weeks ago when they did their big Pixel reveals. And they're going head-to-head with Amazon in the cheap streaming stick, I guess you call them, department. Adam, what's at play here?
Well, basically, the cheapest and easiest way to give an old TV a smart overhaul, rather than just dumping it on the nature strip and buying a new smart TV, has been for a long time to plug in a Chromecast. So a Chromecast is a little dongle that plugs in the HDMI port, and then you can stream video from your computer, your smartphone, or tablet to the dongle and then onto your television. So any app you can run on your phone, well, almost any app you can run on your phone, Netflix, Stan, or whatever, push a button, bang, it's on the TV. Fantastic. But they're kind of having to move with the times. And one of the big differences with this new one is that Google's actually gone down the path of giving us something with a remote control, which they've always stayed away from. That's what the others have always been, more of that traditional experience of, I plug this thing into the television, I have a remote control on the coffee table. Google's always kind of been like, oh, we don't need to do that. You've got a phone in your pocket. Now they're like, maybe you need to do that. But there's a lot more at stake here. And it really comes down to the differences between how Google and Amazon not just approach streaming, but approach Australia. Gus, sort of with your experience with the sort of streaming devices, what are you looking for here, and how do you think these ones stack up?
So yeah, I mean, I was very much that person. I travel all the time. I'd often take a Chromecast with me because it's tiny and you could just plug it into your television and off you could go. But having said that, this year I finally bought a new television and it actually had Google TV built into it, and I found that much nicer. It's just an easier experience to have one remote that works with everything. So I actually like living in this universe.
Living in this century.
Living in this century is a nice kind of switch. I mean, the interesting thing about Amazon is Amazon's trying to come in for the Australian market. We've always been right at the bottom of their list. We don't get a full set of devices. We're an afterthought, and we haven't had the uptake, and that's very much what's happened here. Where you'd know better than me, Adam. There are a bunch of new Fire Stick models, and we get one of them. I think is correct.
The crappy one. to use a technical term.
The lowest cost one, which I think
the one that doesn't have 4K. Amazon
True.
Prime Video is available in Australia. They have and it's in 4K. They have their own original content, and it's in 4K. And if you were in America, you could buy a whole lot of $50 Amazon streaming sticks that do 4K. Yet for some reason in Australia, we still do not deserve to get a 4K device and we get a 1080p device. It's just insulting. It's textbook Amazon. They've always treated us like idiots. And it's just, I can't see any excuse for it.
I can see one.
It's even stupider, but it's even stupider than that, Adam.
Yeah.
Because if you go into the UI, I was setting up a Fire TV Stick Lite yesterday. You've had a little bit more time with it than I have. And I noticed in one of its sections, it's actually got an apps with 4K compatibility.
Yeah.
you can access it, even though the stick itself will not do 4K.
Yeah, because it's just
Yeah.
the one interface, the one operating system for them all, and they just give us the cheap and nasty hardware. It's what you
Let's be
Gus,
real.
you said you can think of one reason
I
why.
could. I mean, yeah, and look, I know we're not a political podcast, but NBN, maybe let's just bring that in there. Like
No, but
maybe they're
that
just
doesn't
making.
cut it. That doesn't cut it. Every other vendor offers 4K hardware here. That's if Google was doing that, if Apple would, if none of them were bringing their 4K gear here, but also 4K, you can get away with a 4K stream on what 10 megabits per second. I think like at least the people on the NBN, your average speeds would be higher than 10 megabits per second. That does not cut it as an excuse unless you have not even bothered to do any research on the Australian market in the last 10 years.
Well, that's also a possibility, and it's
That's what I'm
interesting
saying.
because it is interesting that actually Amazon has always, as you say, has treated Australia as a kind of afterthought. They've had really good sign up rates this year for Amazon Prime, purely because with everyone in lockdown, getting stuff delivered for free became a lot more appealing. So they've seen a big
Absolutely.
growth in their audience base, and you would kind of hope that maybe that was the signal to them that okay, we could start taking a bunch of things more seriously, like and stock a bigger range. I'd be happy about
Yeah.
that, and but also maybe start thinking about hey, we could offer more than one version of each device that we sell. So you do wonder if that kind of growth isn't going to trigger what on earth is.
Amazon Prime Video was the punchline on this podcast for a while. I think now it's 10 all access. But that, to be fair to them, they got me in with Picard. I gave them some money to watch Picard, and I stuck with them. And I figured out in the end, not just because there's a few other shows I want to watch with them, but when you figure out that deal of what you're saving on delivery for $59 a year, you're basically getting the video for free. So it does actually make a lot of sense. And then in the pandemic, it makes a hell of a lot more sense. So then when you get all these people coming in, still to deny them a 4K device is just a slap in the face.
The thing I wonder though, because this is really very, very cheap, $59 for a stick that will do most of the apps. And actually, they've got one weird advantage though over the Google Chromecast with Google TV, and that's the fact that Amazon has a deal with Apple for Apple TV Plus.
Yes, that is about
So if
the
you've got an
only
Apple TV
advantage.
Plus, well, they've got some really rather good programming. Everyone should watch Mythic Quest. The Ewan McGregor show, Long Way Up, is really very, very good. And the weird thing that I discovered with the Fire TV Stick Lite is it's actually, in terms of ease of content of accessing the material, even though it doesn't do 4K, which Apple, of course, does, it's actually easier than an actual Apple TV is to find the Apple TV Plus content because it's all siloed off on the Fire TV Stick, whereas Apple just spreads it higgledy-piggledy everywhere across the Apple TV UI. It's a mess there, and it isn't here. But I guess the real thing here, Adam, is the app access, and there's a lot of similarity, but there are a few things that either does that the other doesn't.
Well, the one thing that is interesting is that they both do Amazon Prime Video because Google and Amazon were having a spat for a while and they were taking services off each other's hardware. So it is nice that you can watch Amazon Prime Video on it. But then Google and Apple are kind of having a spat, which is where they've gone the my enemy's enemy is my friend, which is why Apple's doing their deals with Amazon. Apart from that, there aren't many things like it's got all the major streaming services that you would expect, and it's got the 5 free to wear catch up services. Is there anything in particular you jumped out that Amazon? Is there some weird all you can eat wrestling streaming service that I didn't see?
There are some smaller streaming apps and services that aren't present, one or the other, and obviously a lot of that comes down to taste.
Yeah.
The other thing that struck me though, because day to day I tend to use Shield TV, the
Oh,
Nvidia
yeah.
produced Android TV thing,
Very nice.
and where it gets messy is Google has these weird little kind of sub brands and sub availability things. So you could look at the Chromecast with Google TV and think, oh, that's just an underpowered Shield TV. And we've had a few Android TV boxes
Yeah.
in Australia over the years, but it's not because there are some apps that just don't exist at all. The big player there being Foxtel. So you can do Foxtel on a Shield TV. You can't do it. The app is not available as yet on the Chromecast with Google TV.
Oh, okay. All right. I'll admit I missed that one. I didn't pick that one up. I'm surprised because the Android TV, the TV corner of the Android store tends to be fairly consistent. I reckon that's probably more a licensing or some kind of back end agreement than it is any kind of technical limitation.
Well, they've definitely talked to them because what is there and what isn't, for example, now on a Foxtel Now box, paradoxically enough, is Binge and KO. They just haven't actually bothered to, or for technical reasons, perhaps Foxtel's not available there. I can't imagine it's a licensing call.
Yeah, taking Binge and KO off Foxtel's Now's own box is just, it's ridiculous. Is that Foxtel's been treating their customers so badly for so long, and that could just be the thing that pushes a lot of people over the edge.
Or at least to
I
stop
don't know.
using
Using a
anything called
Foxtel
Foxtel.
Now box is enough to push most people over the edge.
That should be against the Geneva Conventions. They're pretty hideous.
It's not a good streaming box.
No.
But I mean, you're not wrong. And the other thing that struck me when I was comparing these two devices is there's actually been a bit of consolidation. I mentioned we've had a few boxes, but a lot of them have sort of gone by the wayside. I mean, the Foxtel Now box, not a great device, always had some issues. Foxtel pulling back its own apps is not exactly a sign of confidence. Vodafone's got or had its Android TV box, but it's kind of pulled all mention of it from its website. I imagine parent company TPG just looked at it and went,
No.
nah.
Yeah.
So you don't actually have all that many other little, as you said in the intro, add smart TV to an existing box, or make the smart TV better. Because frankly, an awful lot of smart TV apps don't get updated anywhere near enough and tend to fall way behind or just stop working altogether.
Yeah, even if you've got a smart TV, after a year or two, it's not that smart. It's sometimes easy to just whack a Chromecast into it. One of the things that I do like about the Google TV interface, which, as you say, anyone who's used the Android TV interface on, we'll say, a Sony TV or something like that, it's a very similar feel, is it does a much better job than Amazon's interface on the Fire TV of helping you discover new shows and search across streaming services. The Amazon stick is still very Amazon heavy. It still wants to point you to, hey, this is what's on Prime. And the front page is all about, hey, this is what's on Prime. And if you search, a classic example, if you search on the through the Amazon menus for Seinfeld, it'll say, yeah, that's on Prime. If you search for Seinfeld on the Google, it'll say, yeah, that's on Prime and it's on Stan. So it'll show you more of what your options are. At Google, I guess partly because they don't have their own streaming service that they're trying to back, they're sort of a bit independent here, aren't so bent on forcing you in one direction. I think that makes a better experience because these days, especially during the pandemic, a lot of people have got more than one streaming service and you want to make it easier to find stuff.
It even goes further than that too, because Amazon recently shifted towards selling or renting content through Amazon Prime, or through the Amazon Prime Video, I should say, just to make it clear. And what that's left it with on a lot of devices is a messy kind of UI, because it can be difficult to kind of tell, are they saying that movie's on Prime? Are they saying I can pay for that movie? They do put a little logo on the images, but you've got to keep your eyes really finely peeled to spot it. It can be a bit confusing at times, especially, for example, if you're dealing with kids and they just go, oh, yes, we can watch that. And you've got to go, oh, wait, no, you've got to pay for that one. But the Fire TV stick tends, so far, in my experience, seems to dodge most of that. It seems to just say, no, look, here's Amazon Prime. But you're right. It's very Foxtel Now box, because that pushed Foxtel stuff first and foremost. And then it kind of said, oh, yeah, by the way, we do these other apps as well.
So here's the question. Is this entire category something that's very exciting now, but in 5 years' time is going to look like digital TV tuners? Something everyone needed for a while they upgraded, but eventually everyone's just got a device that does it without needing to add something separate?
No, I don't think so, because there's enough standardization in digital TV tuners that eventually you could trust every television to offer a decent and standard digital TV experience. That's never going to happen with smart TVs, because too many smart TV makers think they know best and they can make their own crappy operating system, or they can do a terrible job of implementing someone else's operating system, and you're never going to get. And if you did get that standardization, the Department of Justice would come in and say it was a monopoly and overthrow it. Seriously.
Yeah.
So I don't think we're ever going to reach the point in the next, or at least not in the next 3 or 4 years, where it just becomes I think people do think it's standard, though. They just go out and buy a smart TV and don't give any thought to the fact that does it run WebOS or does it run an Android or does it run whatever rubbish Panasonic were putting on their TVs last time I looked at it? They were always lagged behind. So my theory has always been you shop on picture quality, you get the best picture quality you can, and then you let your streaming dongles and your set-top boxes do the heavy lifting. Don't buy a crappy picture just to get good smart TV features.
Yeah, absolutely. The updates to those apps are so critical in their
Yeah.
availability. I mean, some do better than others. I think
LG's not
Samsung
bad.
for a while had a setup where you could actually get like a separate feature board to install in certain models of their TV to
The
upgrade the capabilities.
universal box or something.
But
Yeah.
yeah. And that's one way of getting around that problem. But honestly, the Chromecast with Google TV, which I think we're both leaning towards as a better option overall,
absolutely. There's no
is what, $99. The Fire TV Stick Lite, if you're particularly crunched for budget, is $59. That's really a very small sum to pay to keep up with the apps that you might want to run, because there's going to be a lot of smart TVs out there, for example, that still don't have Disney Plus.
Yeah, that's a good example. A good thing, a new thing comes along like that, and you have to wait for it to turn up. And like I said, LG's been pretty good on that. But even then, my LG OLED is 3 years old, maybe. And there's one or two things that, sorry, we've released feature updates, but you don't get that because your TV is a bit too old. You can't have AirPlay streaming or whatever else. And I don't think it's a hardware limitation.
Yeah, and we know you're suffering without 10 All Access, Adam, but you'll get there.
All those Neighbours episodes going unwatched.
All Neighbours all the time.
Well, you do live in Melbourne. But look, I mean, again, I've got a Sony TV. I think when I installed it and was more configuring the picture, because I agree with you, I looked at the smart TV apps and I went, oh, well, that's cute. And then I plugged in a set-top box and I've never been back.
I've got a 6-year-old Sony TV in the bedroom, and it's got the most horrendous smart TV interface on it. It's clunky, and it's only got a handful of apps. And I plugged a dirt cheap Chromecast into it and never looked back. And that's what I would recommend to most people if you're not happy, if you're happy with the picture but not happy with what your TV's doing. But what you're saying before about the Amazon stick only being $59, the standard Chromecast, last time I looked, that's not 4K, is also only $59. And then the 4K one is $99. If Amazon released this stick, but then also released a $99 4K version, I'd have absolutely no problem with that. And they have $99 4K versions. That's the thing. They're sitting in a warehouse in America. They just can't be bothered sending them here.
The one thing I would worry about, though, with that $99 Fire TV stick, and the one other big difference where I would lean towards... No, not so much, is the remote.
Oh,
because and Adam, your experience may differ, but my experience, short though it's been, has been that the Fire TV Stick Lite's remote is an exercise in fighting, especially fighting it double recognizing taps, which is critical when you're doing things like entering the passwords or passcodes for apps, because it's like, right, I need to select the A, so I tap once, and it goes 6 things across the screen. It drives me nuts. The Chromecast with Google TV, it's a cheap little remote, but it works, it does volume. It's a much better small remote.
It does, because it does the power and the volume, and it does the inputs as well, which you don't tend to see on those little third-party remotes that can control your television. With the Fire TV, does none of the Fire TV remote has not really changed in the last few, because I've imported them from America before to see how the 4K ones look, and they work fine here. But yeah, Google has definitely given more thought to this is what people actually want from a device that you're going to plug into your television that's maybe replacing a remote.
Well, that just about wraps up another episode of Vertical Hold. Thanks to Gus for joining us for the show.
Pleasure to be here.
Now, Gus, now is your time to plug your publication, your social media accounts, and your favourite Australian native mammal. Go.
My publication is finder.com.au. You can find me on Twitter at GusWorldAU. And my favourite Australian native mammal, of course, is the wombat, because you just can't go past the square poo.
Look, that's absolutely right. And as we're recording this on National Wombat Day, Vertical Hold is also on Team Fatso. And as always, you can catch up with us online at Vertical Hold AU on Twitter, at verticalhold.com.au on the web, or on the Vertical Hold Facebook page.
And I actually read somewhere that today, Friday, the day that the podcast being released, is International Mozzarella Day. So make sure you have some fun with that. Thanks, everyone. Cheesy. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in. Thanks to all those loyal fans who've hung around for 301 episodes. We really appreciate you coming along to join the show. Vertical Hold is proudly brought to you by Aussie Broadband, changing the game with their award-winning network and Australian-based support. Play the pillowcase.
The pillowcase is crucial, it would seem. So